Hello and welcome everybody. This is Abdullah, co-founder of Silverline Community and your host to the Mean Who podcast, the show that sheds light on the movers, shakers, and shapers of the creative and cultural industries. Today we are honored to kick off our theme on experimentation with one whom I personally consider to be one of the world's leading aesthetes, Debs. Nada is a Lebanese designer living and working in Beirut. Her work spans scale and discipline, from product and furniture design to one-off commissions across craft, art, fashion, and interiors. What ties her work together is her ability to distill culture and craftsmanship to create pieces of emotional resonance. In essence, she captures the power of the human hand to tell stories that touch the heart. She calls her approach handmade and heartmade. Nada, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Happy to be here.
I mean, we don't have to introduce you, but do you mind sharing a bit about your background with our viewers?
So I'm a furniture designer, basically, and I moved to Beirut 22 years ago. I grew up in Japan, and I lived in America. I studied at the Rhode Island School of Design, and I worked in the UK before I moved to Lebanon 22 years ago. In a way, my work is actually a reflection of the four continents that I grew up in, between Japan, USA, UK, Europe, and the Middle East.
How would you describe your process of experimentation?
Okay, so what I found when I came to the Middle East is that people have not really explored craft of the region. So in a way, there was a sense of shame in the idea of local craft. So by the time when I was here and I was looking at what are the craft techniques that have been used, because when I was in London, I was very exposed to very interesting craft. Turned out that craft had reached from making beautiful pieces for the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire down to a cheap tourist product on the streets of the souks. And so for me, it was about elevating craft and incorporating design in craft, and then elevating it so that we can actually feel proud of what we have and what we make.
When you're talking about craft and how in the Middle East and the Arab region, there hasn't been a lot of exploration in it, but now you spend more time in the UAE. So, and I've lived and I was born and raised in the UAE, and there is a big push in celebrating culture through handcraft specifically. So what's your view on this?
Today, I think that, it's funny to say that I always say, I'm aiming to be Hermes of the Middle East. And this is about really valuing nature of craft because it reflects our identity and our heritage. And it's really about preserving that and taking it to the next level. Because the new generation, if we lose this, I think the new generation will have nothing that represents them in a way. And anything made by hand, it really has, by a human being, has value. And this is the basic core. I mean, I feel that, we're craft custodians. We're here to preserve craft and heritage and take it to the next level.
So do you believe in the process of experimentation, anything by hand is extremely necessary and not the sole dependence on technology per se?
I think we can't deny technology, and it's an interesting outlook. When we hear technology, we hear when we see technology, we see how easy things can be made. But really, at the core of everything, as human beings, we need to touch and feel. And, I think COVID was a very good example of how much people were depressed because there was that human contact was missing. And I think that the human element must continue. Even when we do our craft, some of the things are made by machine, of course. It simplifies things. But where we put our energy and love is where our hands are. I always use the example of cooking, because when you're cooking for someone you love, the food is so good. And there's no way you can explain it except when you're putting your whole energy and attention. And this energy is what people feel when they're eating. And in a way, with crafted products, you're drawn to it naturally. When something is made by straw, for example, now these cane chairs, you're drawn to it because it's so natural and it comes from the earth and it's woven by hand. And so I think that we just really subconsciously feel the energy of that craftsman, of the love of that craftsman.
It's a beautiful comparison you did with cooking, because usually in our culture, when we eat something that's delicious, we say the soul of the person was in the food. And it's a beautiful comparison to say that the soul of the craftsperson is in this piece that you have. If you continue on the element of technology, how do you see traditional craftsmanship adapting to our changing times of how we create and consume?
I would just work around it, like the technology is going to be there. It's simplified, for example, doing drawings, having drawings done, because then, we can see how our products will appear. When we sometimes do very intricate carving, we actually draw it on the computer and then we print it out and then we apply that printout on the wood, let's say, and then the craftsman starts carving around. So we work around technology, but at the very core, that human element has to be there. So it's when we go back to cooking, it's like someone prepares everything for you, but the person who's actually stirring, with the spoon, that's the energy that's being devoted into that food. That's one aspect of technology. If you talk today about NFTs and metaverses, which is like what's been talked about a lot, and people have been asking me, are you going to make an NFT? To me, why not? But what I would like to get out of this NFT is actually, or the metaverse, is whatever feeling I'm looking for when I see a piece of craft or when I'm drawn to craft or what the hand is creating, that same emotional attachment to the pieces, I would like to recreate in the metaverse, let's say. I think a way of doing it is a very interesting approach is, for example, the repetitive geometry that we use in our part of the world. So let's say it's not crafted, but when you see a repetition of something, we're drawn to it as well. So there is something to that. And that could replicate craft in a way, a repetition of something, repetition of geometry. When you think about it, the Islamic aesthetics is all about repetitive geometry. And that's because they didn't want an image of anybody, any face. And so they needed some abstract form where they can feel this sense of elation to beauty, to God, this sense of infinity. And so they used geometry and a repetitive geometry in order to reach that. And actually, we do feel it when we see something that's repetitive. There's no beginning, there's no end, and we feel like we're floating. And we have that same thing when you look at the sea. And when you look at the sea, it's almost like, or the waves, the ripples of the waves. It is almost like a geometry. And there's no beginning and there's no end. And it soothes us. I think that if you can replicate that in the metaverse or an NFT, then maybe we might be able to get the same feeling.
Maybe your title in the NFT should be Divine Geometry. You've worked with a lot of craftspeople from different generations and across the world. How do you perceive the older generation of craftspeople and the relationship with technology?
So the older people really are not, like, they don't get it at all. Maybe their children might try to introduce technology. So it's very, very funny that most of the craftsmen I know, their children study computer design, which is like exactly the opposite of what they are doing, that their parents are doing. When they see like what we're doing, coming up with contemporary designs, this young generation is starting to see their parents' craft, their father's craft in a different light, because now they're seeing that it's trendy, it's cooler, so they're coming around. But I think the older generation, they don't get it. They don't understand the technology. Some are open, but then there are some that actually use technology to cheat. Like they're like, oh, now we don't have to like carve so much. We can use a CNC machine. So I come around and I'm like, no. I'm worse than the older generation. I'm the one who's telling them, no machines, please. We want to feel you. We want to feel your soul and your energy. Then they like it when I tell them that.
Okay.
Because that's their core. Yeah.
And in your opinion, because you mentioned cheating, what do you think are the main challenges facing designers when it comes to protecting their intellectual properties? And I'm sure you probably must have run into some problems with this.
When I first started, it was kind of revolutionary, taking traditional craft and putting it in a much more contemporary sense. So it took a life of its own. A lot of people started to imitate what I do. I created a ripple effect among the craftsmen. So it wasn't just my craftsmen, but you have craftsmen in Syria, in Egypt, who were doing this kind of, like someone gave them that permission that it's okay. You can actually experiment with something new patterns, new ways of making. It never occurred to them because, they're in it. For me, at the beginning, I was a bit offended when people started to imitate. But then I thought, for the better good, actually, we are actually changing our sense of identity. And this is a tool that I've given. Yes, you are allowed. It's okay. I kind of felt like I gave permission, like, someone did it. So it opened the door for all these other people. Ella, the way I now protect myself is that I create things that are really difficult to do. And I challenge my craftsmen. And, really, no one wants to bother to do these things. They'd rather just stick to the simple stuff. So now my newer pieces over time has developed into products that are harder to do and need a lot of patience to explain and a lot of prototyping and a lot of experimentation. And so that is my way of pushing craft with these craftsmen and also avoiding too much imitation. I mean, I can't stop people from doing contemporary. That's my whole line is to support the craft industry. So I can't stop them. The opposite, I want to encourage them.
Have you ever faced any backlash from trying to break the boundaries of the divine geometry? Because as you said, a lot of these craftspeople have always thought we need to be within our borders. So have you ever faced a backlash?
Only time I faced a backlash is that I got a traditional carpet, typical Persian carpet, and I cut it. I cut the carpet. And I created a circular shape or oval shape. Like I wanted it to look like pebbles, but it was all the Persian carpet. And I remember I had it hung on my wall as a tapestry. And someone walked in and they're like, Astaghfirullah, like they thought that I was like completely destroying something sacred. I really felt guilty actually after that. I felt like, what did I do? I must have done something horrendous. But then at the end, I understood that they couldn't help but see it as like, let's say, a prayer rug, for God. The carpets are made to pray on. And so they saw it as someone like betraying that prayer to their God. But at the end, it is really human beings who are weaving. And for me, it was just the reason I did it is because I wanted people to notice that carpet again, because we take it so much for granted. And carpet making is such a beautiful, beautiful craft. And, people just take it for granted. We throw them away, we get rid of them. But if you really see how they do, knot after knot after knot, and the time it takes. So when you actually shape it in a different way, you create a shock factor, and then people start noticing the value of it. That's kind of the reason I do it.
Well, I guess mission accomplished.
Yeah, mission accomplished. Yeah.
I'll leave you with this last thought. What's the most common misconception about design and craftsmanship that you would like to correct?
I think that craft is often seen as negative or cheap, inexpensive, like I said earlier, a tourist object. But I think today craft should be a much more elevated art. And when you think of France, they call it des arts décoratifs. So it's decorative art. It is considered art. And I feel that today we have to give value to craft and understand that craft is like an elevated form of art. When you look at Japan, you have these master craftsmen. They value them so much. They worry about that last person who makes that special basket, because that is like, it would be a lost art. And so here, I think, our job is to keep that craft going so that we don't lose that beauty of working with the hands, the meditative, spiritual aspect of it. So that is like extremely important. I think it's something very sacred that we should not forget. And there's a term I created so that it becomes very accessible to people. I actually registered it in one of the digital dictionaries, and the word is craft cool. So it was really like, I was trying to say that craft is cool. And so I thought, what a short way of saying it would be craft cool. Just to make craft something like really cool. And when you think about it now, they make crafted beer, crafted, they use that word craft. It's a bit overused, but it's kind of reflecting that value for the human being.
We'll make sure to mention this when we publish the podcast so that we can make it viral.
Yeah,
with your
that
permission.
would be amazing. Yeah, sure.
I promise you that was the last question, but now I'm curious to know what's the craft that's closest to your heart?
I love anything with wood. There's something, it feels so live for me. And there's this craft of marquetry that is usually on backgammon games. And we really take it for granted, but it entails so much work. And for me, like when something takes so much time and then at the end looks really beautiful when it's laid out, it's something that I'm really drawn to. So this is today a craft that I'm really appreciating working on. We're trying to come up with different ways of using this marquetry craft.
Beautiful. Nada Anjad, thank you so much for your time.